Hey guys, it's Vol. Today is finally the day where we get to talk about the Neoterra Capitaline Army, one of the sectorials playable in Infinity. It's the Pan-O sectorial where you get to play specifically the guys who are, I guess, associated with the Pan-Oceania High Command, the Hexahedron, and their special operatives and so forth. We're going to have a bit of an overview of the sectorial, and of course, I'm going to take the time to go through every single profile available to them, and I'll talk about a lot of things in detail, and hopefully get a pretty in-depth discussion about it. As you guys know, I've done the army swap with our local friend Admiral JCJF. You might know him from the forums, and you'll see some of my bat reps in which I was playing them. I think I might have edited it wrong, but I think I played 11 or 12 games with them altogether. So I think I won 8 games out of that, lost 1 game, and I got 2 draws. So I wouldn't I wouldn't take anything out of that though. That's a pretty meaningless statistic because I think the outcomes of games like that have more to do with what mission it was and how well I played versus my opponent. Winning or losing didn't have wasn't affected too much by the actual faction choice. I still would have won and lost with the other sectorials, I believe. As you guys have figured out as well, NCA aren't really my favorite sectorial in the sense that I feel that they are a little bit bland. They're not really my play style. But that isn't to say that they can't be effective. Some people think that they're very good sectorial. I just want to talk quickly about power levels of sectorials as well, where quite often you'll hear somebody throwing around the phrase that, oh, they're one of the better sectorials. They're a really good sectorial. What does that really mean? I think if you add it up, I think there's somewhere around like, is it 24 different little sub-factions and things? If we just go around here and we look through them on armies, so there's 4 for Pano that you can play, plus 3, that's 7 so far, plus 4, that's 11 so far. That takes up to 14, 17, 21, 23, 24. So if you think that one sectorial is one of the best sectorials, it's got to be better than 12 of the other ones, right? It's got to be in the top half. But thinking through them, I mean, which sectorials do we feel aren't in the top half? Military Orders just recently won Interplanetary, although I think that's more to do with players and matchups and what actually happened. I think Military Orders are still in the bottom half, same with Shock Army. Going through Eugene, maybe Japanese sectorials in the bottom half, but a lot of people really like them, and you can't really sort of come out and just start saying, "Oh, these are one of the worst sectorials," because you get all these white knights showing up, and suddenly uh, there's an argument. I mean, I think that Caledonia and the French probably bottom half, Capiculki probably near the bottom. With Nomads, I think Corregidor are a little bit on the weaker side. Morats and Shazvasti maybe at the moment, although Shazvasti are due for a rework. Aleph's doing great, and Tohar's probably number 2. I rate ISS number 1 at the moment. Other people think Tohar's the best. I think that's a bit more subjective. But we're really here to talk about the Neoterra Capitaline Army, and I think it's not what I'm trying to say is that it's not that they're particularly underpowered that I feel is the problem. It's that they're bland and they lack options and their better lists write themselves. I just want to take the moment to compare this sectorial to the Japanese sectorial army, which is one of the most popular sectorials out there. I think a lot of people are drawn to the Japanese straight away, partly because of their models and the style. People like to play like space ninjas and so forth. But the thing about JSA is that being a JSA player gives you access to something very characterful. You can take Shinobu as your lieutenant. You couldn't take that in normal Yuching. You've got Saito Togan, a character. You've got Yojimbo, a very unique character. There's nothing else really in the game that has a combination of the bikes and the koalas and the close combat martial expertise and the smoke grenade launcher, right? So there's nothing that really has all of that. Then you've got Miyamoto, Musashi. Again, that he's quite a unique set of rules and he's a unique model. You can take Asuka Kizaragi. I mean, she's a character as well. She can be a lieutenant. So it's quite flavorful, quite characterful. And with the Diaphos set, you've got that girl with the Panzerfaust, can't remember her name at the moment, Yuriko Oda, I think it is. Whereas if you come back to Neoterra Capitaline Army, well, they've got, what is it? They've got by Pandra, and I think there's one other character you can take, but by Pandra is the only one I could particularly remember at this point. And I mean, even by Pandra is not really a model that the Neoterra Capitaline Army's players particularly like. And then when it comes to forming the army itself, I mean, JSA, you've got the Kaisotsu Link Team or the Haramaki Link Team. Whereas with NCA, you've got either the Fusilier Link Team or, well, what are you going to replace that with? The Fusiliers are clearly the best ones. Heaps of people make arguments for the bolts, and we're going to talk about bolts in this video. And the Orc Harass team is underpowered. It's not optimal. You could play it, but it's just not something which is superior to the other options. Whereas JSA, you've got a bit of choice. There are quite a few different lists which work. So that is my example of sort of what I feel is wrong with NCA at the moment. In terms of like their power level, there are a few units which are going to be crutching really hard on, so you lean on them like a crutch. You've got the Fusilier Link Team, the Swiss Guards are very good, the Bulleteers excellent, the fact you can take 3 Fugazis to bulk out your regular orders in the CSUs. And those are the things that I feel are really, really good about NCA, but I feel it's kind of stink that you have to sort of rely on those things. What I would like to see is some of the less viable choices in NCA get a boost without any change to the things you ordinarily take, just so that when you approach list building with the NCA and you're serious about coming up with the best list you can, there's a bit of ambiguity in optimal play there. You have to actually think for a bit about sort of what to include, what not to include. So here we go. We should probably take the time to talk through all of the units, and we'll go through a bit of a list. Actually, there's one more thing that I want to cover off, and this is a segment that I'm going to have to start doing a little bit more, and I like to call this little video segment, the segment, what do I buy? Let's say you're a new player, and you've decided you're going to play Pan-Oceania, and for some reason you've got it in your head, you specifically want to start NCA, and that's what you want to be your main faction. I hear from new players all the time saying, hey, look, I've got these models, what do I buy next? You see these threads on the forums like every single day. And what I also find is that experienced players jump on this and say stuff like, oh, just proxy some other models and then buy later, or just buy the models that you think are the coolest. And those two bits of advice are very good bits of advice, but new players don't like to hear that kind of thing. When you are new, you want to participate, you want that level of ownership, you want to have your own models, you want to get into it, you want to paint them, you want to have something which is you and is allowing you to participate on your own terms. So that's why you see this commonly asked question. So I want to take a minute to address that actually. Let's say you have you've started off and you've got the Operation Ice Storm box set. Well, let's assume that you have that already. In fact, rather than opening this page here, I should probably just go to the Pano starter set. So let's say maybe you've swapped with your friend and your friend's got Corregidor. Let's talk about this. So obviously the 3 blank Fusiliers are excellent because you're going to be using them in every list with Pan-Oceania basically, except some quirky lists which run bolts instead or something like that. These other 3, well, the Orc Trooper isn't so great in NCA, but he's usable in NCA, whereas the Nis and the Akali aren't. But there's nothing stopping you from using the Akali to proxy as a Locust if you want to, or the Nisses to represent maybe a Black Friar Sniper, or something like that, or a Hexas Sniper. And then the Orc Trooper, well, you just use it as an Orc Trooper, or if you want to, proxy him as a Swiss Guard, or an Aquila Guard. So that's sort of how you're starting, but we want to talk about a little bit about what to get next if you already have those guys and you want to branch out into NCA. Similarly, if you are about to pick up the brand new Beyond Ice Storm box, which has the 3 models, the Swiss Guard and the Kamau and the Bolt Paramedic. If you are thinking of getting into NCA and you're thinking to buy that box, I don't recommend it because really only the Swiss Guard's relevant. A lot of people don't like his pose anyway, and you're probably be better off just waiting or just buying a single model of your Swiss Guard or proxy him with your Orc Trooper. So I don't really love that box set. We should probably talk about it at some stage, but yeah, I'm just wondering if there's a picture of it. don't think there is. I don't think it's come out on this particular page. Anyway, I digress. So, just to come back to this question of, you're just getting into it, you're buying a few models, what are your priorities with playing this faction? Well, my number one recommendation is to actually go for the box that has the Johnbot remotes in them. So these guys here, I think this is really, really important because one of the special things about NCA is that your Fugazi has a availability of 3. These are the flash pulse bots, the 6/6 speed. They've got mimetism, so they last a little bit longer. They can be repaired, obviously, and they've got a flash pulse to help defend themselves. But they're only 8 points, so you're able to fuel your heavier stuff like your Swiss Guard, or maybe a tag if you're running one, with a lot of these guys, and they're relatively small, so you can hide them. But the thing about it is that if your deployment zone is just stuffed full of models, you can also deploy them on corners and actually use them as ARO pieces, accepting that they're going to die. And sometimes they get a crit flash, or they slow your opponent down because your opponents just failed to kill them because of the mimetism. I also like the idea of just moving them out in your last turn. If you say you go first on your third turn, coordinated order, you move all of the Fugazis out in the open where they can just see fire lanes, and your opponent has to get around them or shoot them, wasting orders instead of pressing buttons. So that's really important. But not only that, the other two things that you can use with the John bot, like the Sierra HMG TR bot, is very usable, and the Sense bot is especially useful as well. I find that is a bit more relevant in NCA because it's got willpower 13, and your normal plebs have just willpower 12. Well, when I say normal plebs, I'm talking about like the Fusiliers, right? So the Fusilier, hacker or medic or fort observer that you can be using to hit objectives. Not as effective as the Pathfinder because Pathfinder's faster. It's got sensor to help out there, and revealing enemy ninjas and stuff like that. But willpower 13. Wouldn't recommend, of course, assembling them as a Clippertron bot with the intelligent missile launcher because the smart missile launcher is just not effective in the rules. It's very difficult to get a spotlight hack off because they can reset against it. If you're forward observing them to target them, well, if you have got line of sight to them, you can just shoot them with an HMG anyway. And even if you do manage to target them and put them into that state, your opponent can do stuff like U-turn hacking programs, and you're spending a lot of orders on the Clipper anyway, and he's limited to 5 shots, so it's just not effective. So if you're new and you're just starting with Pan-Oceania, I wouldn't just get one box of these guys, I'd get 2, because that way you can assemble 3 of them as the Fugazi, 1 of them as the Pathfinder. That'd be my optimal choice. But if you're very clever with magnetization, you could put the guns on in different ways so that you can use them as TR bots, for example. But this, I mean, even CB accepts that it's perfectly normal to use a model that looks like it's got a machine gun on it to represent a different profile, for example. So that's fine. So the remotes, I think, are a real must if you're playing this faction. The second thing that I would recommend, in fact, maybe even the first thing I'd recommend, is just getting enough Fusiliers to make the link team. If you've already got Operation Ice Storm, well, you buy these guys, you've got 3 combi rifles, which you're inevitably going to use as models like the Lieutenant, normal plebs to decoy as a Lieutenant, and then this is perfectly filling it out. You're going to use the missile launcher almost always. The HMG is really, really good. Sniper rifle, not so much, but you can convert it into another combi rifle, or even use the sniper sometimes. And the hacker's just amazing because he's cheap, and even though he's willpower 12, he's not really using it to do any brain blasts or hacking like that most of the time. He's just using assisted fire, support wear kind of thing, fairy dust to help your heavy infantry, and the willpower doesn't matter because he's not making a dice roll to put those support wear programs up. So these guys, I think, are a must. You get them straight away. If you already have the Beyond Ice Storm box, you could always just use that paramedic bolt to represent a Fusilier. I mean, that's really straightforward. Beyond that, I think it's worth getting the support pack, of course. These guys have terrible willpower, but they're not too expensive, and the thing about Pan-Oceania is that you've got some models like the Aquila Guard and the Swiss Guard missile launcher that you might be using as arrow pieces sometimes, or even attacking things that might crit them and kill them. So having a trauma dock nearby to revive them is really, really useful. You can spend the command tokens if you fail the Whip 12 check. Or with the engineer, if you're running a tag, you probably want to take him. Or even if you're just running a lot of bots, taking him's not bad. He can pick up a classified every so often, so you can never go wrong with buying that box. So if you're just starting, that's great. I probably should say a few things about things you probably don't want to go for straight away. I don't actually think that the actual official Neoterra Capitaline Army starter pack really really is that worth getting, unless you're going to proxy things or convert things. Just looking at it, it's got 3 combi rifle bolts, and again, we're going to talk about why bolts aren't very good, but they aren't very good. Simple as that. You will use the Swiss Guard missile launcher. The Aquila Guard multi-rifle is a bit of an older sculpt. I don't like the way he looks, and he's got a multi-rifle, which is not really the optimal profile for him, but he's still semi-usable, and the Hexas Spitfire is fine. So don't hit yourself in the head if you've already bought this box, but I just don't think it's a priority thing to purchase if you're getting into Neoterra and you haven't bought anything yet. I think I'll stop this segment here about what to buy, what not to buy. Yeah, we'll spend a bit more time talking about the actual units themselves, and we'll come back to that. Okay, so let's just get into the meat of the video discussion. The Alive Anti-Establishment group is a little group that I'll be using a lot during my Army Swap month playing Neoterra, but the thing about these guys is that in a short while they probably will not be available to the Sectorial, so I probably shouldn't spend too much time talking about them. But the thing about them that I really like is that they're not too expensive. For 50 points you get 3 orders, and that's really going to help you fuel heavier duty things. But the thing about them is that they've got wonderful willpower. You can use Cypher to actually press buttons on objectives. That's a Pan-Oceania weakness, and you're mitigating that by having a willpower 14 guy sitting right there. I really like the fact that they have the holo projector in switch, so you can actually pretend switch as Cypher. You've got 2 models out there. Your opponent isn't sure which one has the repeater, which one is the assault hacker, so it protects them somewhat against killer hacking, because your killer hacker is a little bit afraid to get into an engagement with so many hackers across the board, because typically you're running these guys along with a Fusilier hacker or along with a Hexa killer hacker, so you've got that massive hacking superiority. And if you're up against an army that doesn't have too much hacking like Toha or Ariadna, I generally feel that you've got some things elsewhere in the faction which is quite good against that sort of stuff. The Aquila Guard especially, I think against a lot of camo markers maybe. Well, I don't know if he's especially good. He's just useful. And even if you're not doing any hacking with these guys, I still think they're handy. I mean, they come with so much special weaponry like the Emirates and the adhesive launcher, the emitter. You don't use these all the time, but they see some use. So I think I'll stop it there with the Alive team. They're not going to be available for Neoterra for that long, although Neoterra are one of the factions that could really use them. They could really be quite useful. Time to talk about Auxiliers. Going back 6 to 8 months, I thought that these guys were like the top unit in Pan-Oceania, and my opinion about that's changed. The strong thing about these guys is that you move out, the orc spot's quite fast, and if you're attacking something, your opponent has to choose between dodging or shooting back, and regardless of which action they take, they're going to be at a disadvantage against one of your units, because the flamethrower and the combi rifle work different mechanically. If you choose to dodge, then the combi rifle is going to make easy work of you, but if you shoot back, you take a free hit from the flamethrower. Unless I've misread the rules, I also believe that you can shoot different targets with these guys, making them very efficient. And they're relatively cheap. You can fit them in a list. Also, they can be fort observers, so that is a useful ability. Willpower 12 isn't wonderful, but it still gets the job done in some cases. You can even use them as your lieutenant, although I wouldn't really recommend the lieutenant option because it takes an entire SWC, so that's not optimal. The reason I don't love these guys as much anymore is that when it comes to defending your deployment zone, you can take CSUs which have nanopulses, right? So you've got a little bit of template weaponry to protect yourself already, so you may not necessarily need any more. When it comes to pressing buttons, well, you kind of want to be doing that with other things. You might be using a Hexa. I think the Hexa killer hack is something we're going to talk about shortly, and that's a better option than these guys. If you're going to be going and attacking, I feel like you're going to spend too many orders just walking them all the way around the other side of the board and potentially dying to things. Your Auxilia orc spot's going to get hacked maybe. So I don't think they're very order efficient. It's just a ballistic skill 11 combi rifle at the end of the day. you should really be using stuff like the Garuda or the Bulleteer or the Pathfinder or a Tag or a Hexas Spitfire, things like that, or even just moving out your Fusilier Link team and just getting really brutal with the big guns from that. So that's why I don't feel like Auxilia are at the top of the food chain anymore. I believe they may have been in earlier editions. Availability total. When I first saw NCA, I thought, oh, okay, this is the good thing about NCA. You can take as many Auxilia as you want. But the thing is, it's really diminishing returns. The points build up pretty quick. And the thing about them, again, is that if they're just there for defending, you've got a 15-point guy defending, whereas other factions are paying like 5 points for a Ghazi or a Guangxi. You can pay 11 points for a CSU, get a boarding shotgun, combi, nanopulsar, for example. So they're just inefficient if they're just sitting there generating an order. It also gets annoying when you're placing a guy with your Orc spot as well. You've got to keep them apart. You've got to worry about grenade launches and heavy rocket launches and things like that. So they're not great at just doing that. But if you're taking a lot of them and you're attacking with them, well, you can only move out one at a time. And unless I'm mistaken, I'm sure you guys will correct me, I think there's an issue with spending command tokens to coordinate orders if you've got an Orc spot. I don't think that's allowed. I can't quite fully remember, but if so, that's an issue for them. So for those reasons, I don't think Auxilia are like must includes. They're not the best thing in the faction. But you still see them, you still take them. If you've got a little bit of points to spare and you've already taken some of your other auto-include, essentials for this faction, then sure, they can be really, really useful. I wouldn't take more than 2, to be honest. I did initially write some lists with 20 orders, which had, 4 of them, but I think they clutter up your deployment zone too much. And they have an effect of diminishing returns if you take too many of them. CSUs. Recently, it got announced that Imperial Service were getting these guys as well, and some people in the community got really annoyed by that. I personally think it's very, very irrational. I think the only reason Corvus Belli have allowed that is that they want to sell more sets of Beyond Ice Storm and Beyond Red Veil. I think that's, I can't think of any other explanation. These guys were the only thing that was unique to NCA, and now NCA doesn't actually have any unique unit it can take, that only it can take, which really waters it down and weakens NCA as a sectorial. I mean, we were talking about JSA a little while ago, and JSA have like half a dozen things that only they can take, which is crazy. Well, I think it's probably only 3 or 4 specific models that only they can take, but we're talking about options. So the CSU still are very, very good. My favorite profile is the Combi Rifle Nanopulsar, because sometimes you roll up a really useful metachemistry result like NWI or a little bit of armor or something like that. You can use them to go in suppression fire, and it only costs 1 more point than a boarding shotgun. And this way, at the end of the game, you can just put them out, put them somewhere where you can just shoot at things approaching objectives, and they have to waste orders killing them first before they move out and press the button. And in the meantime, he's generating an order for a very, very cheap 12 points and defending your deployment zone with his nanopulsar. Sixth Sense level 1 also makes it really handy to avoid those shenanigans where people are coming up and throwing a smoke grenade, Kodali comes in and attacks. Well, you're immune to that with Sixth Sense level 1 because you can delay your ARO. So that really, really helps. You can't come around a corner and get in close combat with him because he can delay his arrow, so it's just really, really useful. The BTS-3 is not going to come up very much, but very handy. Pano style BS-12, I really like this guy. I would probably take 2 in just about every single NCA list, so he's one of the most useful, most desirable profiles in this faction. The Breaker Rifle, I wouldn't take that profile because you get no nanopulsar. It's very situational. Occasionally, you'll shave off a couple of points of BTS on something that had big armor and BTS, but a lot of the time it'll be like, well, you're shooting at a target that either has no BTS or some BTS, but didn't have any armor anyway, so the combi rifle would have been just as effective, if not more effective, and dropping the nanopulsar just isn't worth it, so you'd never take that. Boarding shotgun, I'd only take this profile if I've built a perfect list and it's at 301 points and I've got a CSU with a combi rifle and I need to save that point somewhere, so I downgrade him to a boarding shotgun. that's really the only time I'd take him, because the boarding shotgun, you're not going to be running across the battlefield and attacking, even if you've rolled up the 8.4 speed, 8.6 speed, or whatever it is for the CSU. It's just not going to come up very much. You've got other things which do that more effectively. So boarding shotgun is more for something that doesn't start in your deployment zone. So I don't think we'd really run this boarding shotgun very much. Deva. So the Deva is an LF unit, really. And it's made available to the hexahedron, the NCA. So let's see if we can find an example of a Deva model, and we'll have a bit of a talk about them. My gut feeling is that these guys aren't exactly the best thing that you can take in NCA, but I think a lot of people will typically disagree with me. The Deva from the classic LF set is this guy, this chick here, and a second from the left. There she is with the combi rifle. This set here is actually rather old now. I mean, I'm starting to collect LF myself, but I'm going to hold off from any more purchases until they inevitably re-release some of their stuff, because I think CB are building up to actually do some re-releases of LF, and I'm looking forward to that, and I'm pretty sure their new models will be amazing. We've got the synchronized Deva unit where you can get some of these guys which have some walk spots as well. And I think there's one guy with a Spitfire, an MSV2. I just can't find where the actual model is. If I keep hunting around, I'm going to get him. Here he is here. Back to the army though. Let's just go through the profiles one by one. So, plain old Deva combi rifle with nanopulsar. So you pay 23 points for a model with NWI. It's got the same ballistic skill as a Fusilier. It's got a nanopulsar. So at the moment, it's a little bit like a CSU that's automatically rolled NWI, except it's got a little bit better willpower, armor, and ballistic skill. To be honest, the strongest thing that I see in the stats here is the willpower 15. That's the standout stat. Everything else is just, you know, either average or slightly above average. But willpower 15 is really, really good. But for it to be really good, it needs to be on a model that is going to actually use its willpower a lot. So unless it's a lieutenant or a specialist, the only time that the willpower is going to be useful is if you're just discovering. And if you're going to pay 23 points for basically a cheerleader that's better at discovering than normal, I just don't think you're going to get the value out of that. So that's why I wouldn't recommend the first profile here. The second profile is exactly like the first, except you're paying an extra 4 points for a Deva bot. So what you're doing here is you're achieving something a little bit like your Auxilia team, except instead of paying 15 points or 14 points, you're paying 27 points. So what the Auxilia team can achieve, these guys sort of achieve just a little bit better because they've got NWI and she's got a nanopulsar as well as a Deva bot, but I just don't really feel like it's worth it. It feels a bit redundant that you've got a nanopulsar and the Deva bot, because you've got a direct template weapon in there somewhere. And when it comes to shooting, well, you know, the Auxilia team's just going to do just as well. They've got almost as much ballistic skill. Again, the willpower stat's not really being used here. So I think we can write off this profile as well. 27 points is just too much. I mean, there are other things you can take for just as many points. We're going to be talking about the Hexas in a moment. I would rather take a Killer Hacker Hexa, which is an amazing profile, over something like a 27-point combi rifle Deva. It's just, to me, one of those is vastly superior for those points. Next up, the hacking device. Now, this gets a little bit more serious because the hacking device can make use of the willpower, but again, it's a regular hacking device. So what you're doing is you are usually using a hacking device for fairy dust, for assisted fire, sometimes hack transport or controlled jump. Okay, so most of those hacking abilities I just mentioned don't need the willpower. One or two of them do. You get a brain blast sometimes. The BTS3 helps when you're doing brain blast, but again, you're paying 31 points. So that is a bit crazy. We go over to the Fusilier hacker and you could pay 18 points. So I just think that's such a whopping difference. I don't really feel like it's going to be worth the extra 3 willpower. Especially given the fact that the Fusilier is already going to be in your list and already going to be in your link team. So rather than taking a whole 31 points and just putting you in your list, I'd rather take a model that's going to be in your link team anyway, like a 10-point Fusilier, and upgrading it to a hacker. That seems a lot more efficient to me. Next profile. This one has a sensor. Now, this is also interesting because willpower 15, you've got a sensor, so this is where things start to get a little bit better. I believe sensor allows you to use triangulated fire. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But the sensor, well, I mean, your Pathfinder also can use sensor. The Pathfinder's willpower 13, you get +6, so there's only like a 5% chance of failing the sensor. And the Pathfinder is quicker than the Diva, so if the reason you're taking this profile is to sensor things, well, it's just cheaper to take the Pathfinder for 16 points, if it is 16 points, I can't remember it. Let's go and check it. Where is he? Pathfinder. 16 points, there we go. So would you want to pay 16 points or 24 points? That's an extra 8 points, which is a whole extra regular order from a Fugazi or something like that, for a little bit better willpower on your sensor, and maybe a better profile all around. I prefer the robot, because the Pathfinder is something that can gain assisted fire, so it becomes better at shooting than the Diva, and it's faster than the Diva, and it's cheaper than the Diva. So I don't think we should really be taking that profile. Multi-spectral visor level 2. Now this is the one that I see people using more often and talking about more often, because I think the reasoning with this guy is that usually you need some sort of MSV2 in your list because there's so much smoke around these days, and the Aquila Guard is too expensive for what he does. So why not just take one of these guys for half the points of an Aquila Guard? And he's almost as durable because he's got armor 2 and NWI. He's not as good at shooting because he's Ballistical 12 against Ballistical 15 with the HMG. And the SWC1 isn't too much to pay. I think this guy's alright. I mean, he's viable. I can understand why people take him. I didn't run him even once in my 11 or 12 games with NCA. And the reason why is that I felt like I could get away with playing a list that didn't use MSV2. My philosophy with Infinity these days has been that if you're up against something with TO Camo, there's usually another way that you can find to destroy them. You can use direct template weapons, you can use close combat sometimes, depending on your list. You can use just direct shooting with high ballista skill, speculative fire. There's a few different ways of doing it. MSV2 is a bit of a luxury. But then you run into albedo sometimes. You know, your opponent, I mean, you're not in mark state, your opponent can just shoot you in their active turn, and even if you have camouflage or ODD and you're shooting at a model with MSV2, well, you're still at an advantage even though they've negated one of your best abilities, because you just have more dice. It's your active turn. Spitfires, I don't think, are the optimal weapon to put on a model that starts in your deployment zone that is not faster than 4-4 speed. Sometimes it's okay in a link team, but I prefer my Spitfires on infiltrating troops, on 6-4 troops, on troops that can actually get a buff, on airborne deployment troopers, stuff like that. So the thing about the Spitfire is you've got to spend some time moving out to get into position to shoot it a lot of the time, especially if you're going first. Whereas the HMG is something you can just move into position. Doesn't take too long, you don't have to go too far and then shoot. It also makes a bit of a better ARO piece, the HMG. So he's okay. I'd probably give him, I don't know whether to give him a 4 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10. I haven't really played him enough. My games against him, I just haven't been impressed by him. And at the end of the day, shock is very prevalent in this game. Anything with assisted fire, any kind of multi-rifle, you've got more Red Furies available in the game now. And those things really just make a mockery of his points cost, sadly. So don't particularly love him. But if you try out the Aquila Guard and you decide you don't like the Aquila Guard, he's taking up too many points on your list, but for some reason you really need MSV2 because you're playing Steel Phalanx all the time or something like that, then sure, yeah, give the Diva a go. The Diva Lieutenant. Now, this is getting even more interesting because these last three profiles are probably the most usable Diva in my personal opinion. And I say that because the Diva gives you a much better chance of winning the Lieutenant role compared to your normal Willpower 12, which is what you're stuck with if you're taking the Fusilier Lieutenant all the time. Is he worth 27 points though? I don't know about that. The Lieutenant with Diva bot I think is a bit excessive. I mean, you're not going to be really fighting with your lieutenant. This faction has no chain of command, so I think we can just cross this profile off the list. They already have a nanopulsar to help defend themselves in close combat, but if we go down to, say, the normal lieutenant, let's imagine you get attacked by a FIDE, or somebody's trying to assassinate you. Well, at least you can fire off your nanopulsar, they swing their sword in close combat, and they might not kill you, because you've got a little bit of armor there, and you've got NWI. Hopefully you're not attacked with a shock weapon. It might be a viral weapon if it's Eldjabal or something like that, or even a monofilament weapon if it's friggin' Specular Killer. But there's a chance of surviving and fending off your attacker with an nanopulsar. And for that 23 points, you're getting that enhanced survivability for being a lieutenant, and you're getting higher willpower. So if you are willing to pay all those extra points, and it does make your lieutenant a bit more obvious, to be honest, if you're willing to spend all those extra points for a greater chance of winning first turn or second turn or deployment or whatever you normally want, then cool. You could even spend one more point and make it a sensor. If I was ever going to take the Diva, I think I probably would take the Lieutenant Sensor, just because that sensor might be useful. In the last turn of the game, you can use Lieutenant order to move out. There might be something you're trying to clear off an objective, like something like a Teo Camo model, like a Spectre or a Crocman, just hiding next to an objective at the end of the game. You can use your Lieutenant to run up there, sensor them, and then combi rifle them or nanopulse them at the end. So if you're going to take any profile at all, it's probably going to be that last one. That would be my only real recommendation. But in general, I don't think the Diva is necessary in this sub-faction. I don't think it's one of the better choices. In my 11 or 12 games with them, I didn't run them even once. I would consider them, but I think you sort of have to start getting bored with the faction and start getting bored with the better choices before you decide to try out some of the other ones. And I think a lot of NCA players who've been playing for a while just like to have that diversity in their games and just mix it up and try things they haven't tried before. And that's sort of the main reason why you take these ones, I reckon. In Vanilla Left, though, a little bit of a different story, because you don't have option to take a 10-point Fusilier Lieutenant, so sometimes you have to rely on the Diva just to have a Lieutenant on the table that's not like Achilles or something like that. Okay, by Pandra is our next model here, and by Pandra is a bit of a disappointment, actually. I wonder where you find the box sets. Might be under Diaphos. Anyway, interesting story. By Pandra is one of the Diaphos models that comes in a box, which also features like Fusilier, Angus, and Tritac Anyat. I remember buying that box because I wanted Tritac Anyat, because I wanted to play Morats. And funny story, I assembled Tritac, I got my Morats on the table, and then a week later I realized I'd accidentally put by Pandra and Angus in the rubbish bin by mistake. And I know a lot of people are going to be cringing hearing that story, because there's a perfectly good by Pandra and Angus sitting in a rubbish tip somewhere in a landfill in Auckland. But that's how little I was worried about those models. I regret it. Like, I didn't mean to do that. I actually wish I had them, because then I'd paint them. But it didn't strike me as something I needed to sort of put safely on a corner on my desk. Anyway, by Pandra is overcosted for what she does. She's just a doctor with willpower 13. You pay a whopping 24 points for her, and she doesn't particularly do any fighting. If you link her up with the Fusilier Link team, she doesn't enhance their Ballistic skill anymore. You're still at Ballistic skill 12. She still starts your deployment zone. You're paying extra points for Armor 2 BTS 3. She's got the rule Specialist Troop, which just dumbfounds me, because Doctor makes her a Specialist anyway. So why give her the Specialist Troop rule? What she needs is some other kind of rule that makes her relevant, or a weapon that makes her relevant. Think of it this way. If you're playing JSA, you're getting these dirt cheap Kaisotsus, but at the disadvantage of having Ballistic skill 10. But in your Link team, you have a Ballistic skill 12 model with a Panzerfaust and combi rifle in the form of Eureka Oda. So what's going on there is that you're paying the absolute minimum, and yet you're getting a fighting effectiveness which is equivalent to something which is a little bit more expensive. And then on top of that, she's got engineer, and she's got mine layer, and she's got a Panzerfaust. So if by Pandra has stuff like that, like mine layer, Panzerfaust, that kind of thing, then she'd be fine. But she's not fine. The light shotgun you're very rarely going to use because you're a defensive link team. You start in the deployment zone. You're going to move around the table, and a lot of times you're just going to be firing your combi rifle. Even a combi rifle point blank is, comparable to the light shotgun point blank. It's only if you manage to line up a bit of a template kill that the light shotgun becomes really, really far and away better. 24 points! I cannot believe it. I mean, what you should be doing is you should be taking just your normal, Fusilier for 10 points, and you take a trauma dot for 14 points, and you've only spent 28 points, and you've got 2 regular orders rather than 1, and you're basically you're getting the same end result as taking Fusiliers and by Pandra. So she's way too expensive. She needs either a gun that helps the link team to make them even better, or she needs a different rule. I think that they should actually let her link with bolts, because you might take her with bolts because she's a bit more of a reliable specialist and she can revive them, and they're shock immune, so you want to doctor her around anyway. It's just disappointing. I mean, she's actually a pretty cool model, blowing her little kiss there, but compared to every other Diafo in the game, I think you could probably come up with 1 or 2 Diafos that are sort of in her camp of not being great, but in this particular box, you compare her with Tritak Anyat, and Tritak is just miles better. I mean, Tritak's got smoke grenades, she's got EM grenades, she's got a K1 combi rifle, I think she's got climbing plus, she's just full of kit. She's got a Swiss Army knife. So before I get too much more angry, we're going to go to Fusiliers. Now we're talking. Okay. So the only regrettable thing about Fusiliers here is that they're for some reason available at E5, whereas in, you're thinking a sectorial like this should make them available in total, but they're limited. But you still got enough here to make a full link team. These guys are fantastic because you're getting Blister Skill 12 in a context where it's useful. You're actually going to be making face-to-face rolls in every single game with your Fusiliers, because you'll be having at least 1 missile launcher or HMG, and it's going to come into a fight at some point. So it just makes it way more effective to defend, and when you're attacking, you're going to be missing less shots, and you're going to be landing more hits, so you're forcing your opponent to take more armor saves. You're just killing things more effectively with your HMG, and they're so cheap. I love the fact that you're essentially getting a cheaper hacking device than normal without suffering from the willpower deficiency, because you're using it mainly for assisted fire, right? So a couple of variations of this link team that I really like are missile launcher, a lieutenant, 2 decoys, and a hacking device. Bam. So you spent only 63 points, dirt cheap. You're fueling the rest of your army with regular orders. Later in the game, you can move out and you Blister Skill 15 forward ice with your combi rifle on anything within 16 inches. Anything beyond that, you might use the missile launcher. You've got your lieutenant in there, but it's very hard for your opponent to guess your lieutenant because you're spreading your link team out with 3 guys. So I really absolutely love this setup. If you're not going to go this way, though, you can always change one of the combi rifle guys into an HMG. You're spending 1 more SWC at this point, but he's still relatively cheap. And with the HMG there, you don't use the HMG as an ARO piece until later in the game. But the thing is, you can very cost effectively just attack things with it at the start if your opponent is using any ARO pieces at all. Imagine you're playing against Toha and they have a Sectorial missile launcher and a Triad, and that's just watching the whole table, and he's set up in a way that just from the deployment zone you can see everything. What you do here is you move your HMG out and you shoot your HMG at him, 5 dice hitting on 12s because of mimetism, assuming cover and range cancel, and the Sectorial is shooting with like 2 dice on 13s. So the odds are definitely in your favor, even though he's 1 ahead of you with Blister Skill. You've got 5 dice to his 2. And it makes it much more likely you can rip off the Symbiomate and then rip off the Symbiont armor and destroy him. But if you get unlucky, you've only lost a single 18-point model. Nothing too serious, and then you can attack with something else instead, Swiss Guard or whatever you have. And doing that can sometimes be preferable in attacking with your tag or something like that, because if the tag or the Swiss Guard gets unlucky, then you get blown up. and the missile launcher gets more value out of its explosive ammunition. And then, or in the later game, you can just start walking out with a link team, and the HMG, usually when you're shooting at something, it doesn't take more than one face-to-face roll to kill it, whereas if you're firing a combi rifle or something like that, your opponent's passing armor saves, you're not getting enough hits, so you're not negating enough of their hits. So the HMG in this context is just so effective because that extra ballistic skill boost. Ballistic skill is a stat that matters more the more dice you're rolling. If you're only using it in a few corner case situations, it doesn't really matter whether you have high or low ballistic skill very much, but when you're using it a lot, it does. You can take light grenade launchers. I don't really love these. I mean, even in sectorials where you can take an X visor, like you can play the Druze link team in QK. Even when I'm up against those guys and they've got an X visor, which is, to be honest, more effective than this Fusilier, they're still not really dominating the game with it very well because they've got to move around and get into range. So not wonderful. The sniper rifle, I wouldn't recommend it in this context. It's still very good, but the problem with the sniper rifle is that as an ARO piece, it's not as effective as the missile launcher a lot of the time. It's got a slightly better range band, but most of the time it's just not as good. And when you're attacking the HMGs, better in almost all cases, unless the range bands are really skewed and you're really on a really weird table. Sometimes I just take the forward observer if I've already got a hacker somewhere else that I don't really need, or if I'm not going to use assisted fire very much, which is unusual. But if for some reason I'm not using assisted fire much, I'll take the forward observer, or even just have a hacker and a forward observer if there are no forward observers elsewhere. But I don't take the forward observer too much because I want the hacker, and I've already got a forward observer on something else like a pathfinder. So that's that. Fusiliers, excellent. One of the best things about NCA, if not the best thing. Hexas now. So you can take more hexas than usual in this sectorial. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should. The standout profile here is the killer hacker, closely followed by the multi-sniper, and the Spitfire is very good as well. Would you just take a normal plain combi rifle guy? I don't think that you would, because it's not too expensive to take one of the other profiles compared to this, and he's a guy that just starts into deployment zone, has to move out and start shooting things. So if his role is to be a Rambo and kill things, you're going to take a heavier weapon to do that. Your Bulleteer is going to be more effective, or your Spitfire in this context is more effective. You wouldn't just take him with a combi rifle. But if he's got a killer hacker device, suddenly he gives you willpower 13, something which is kind of hard to come by in Pan-Oceania compared to the Fusiliers. And the fact that he is a killer hacker does give you that opportunity to destroy their assault hackers, things like that. Use your red rums. He can come out of hidden deployment and surprise them. Very effective profile, and I think this is the number one Hexa profile, and one of the better profiles in the faction. If you are going to play NCA and you don't have something to represent a Hexa, I'd recommend getting something pretty quickly. I want to spend some time talking about the sniper, because I come up against this guy heaps in vanilla Pano and against NCA, and people speak highly of him because, again, it's a surprise unit. You can use it in the active turn, sure, but his strength is hidden deployment. Your opponent moves something else, and then you shoot and hopefully take them down. Ballistic skill 12 means you're hitting on 15, and the multi-rifle is likely to cause some damage. One thing that's kind of weakened this guy in my eyes and my perception is that I play Combined Army, right? So I use the Noctifer, and the Noctifer is close to the same points, maybe a little bit more. But the Noctifer has the same ballistic skill, but it has Dogged, and it has a missile launcher instead of a sniper rifle. And the amount of difference that makes is just massive. I mean, you can survive a double action round, especially if you have NWI or a bit of armor. But are you going to survive a missile launcher? It doesn't come up very much. Also, the missile launcher really punishes bad deployment where things are too close together or link teams moving out with the template, whereas the sniper doesn't. The thing about the sniper is that you have to be very careful not to just spring the trap straight away. Your opponent moves out with, you know, some pleb, impetuous model. You don't really want to shoot them straight away if you expect your opponent to move out with something more valuable. So you got to play them very carefully. As soon as you have attacked with them, it's pretty easy to kill them. Even if they don't have a suitable MSV2 model nearby, they can just shoot them with just a normal, HMG, and that will be enough to get rid of them a lot of the time. I guess one tactic you can use with him is to set him up next to a model that you've designated as an ARO model. For example, you've got your Fusilier link team with everybody prone except for the missile launcher, and that's shooting out things, so your opponent comes to attack it with an HMG, and you surprise them by revealing the Hexa killer, Hexa sniper at the same time right next to him. So that can be cool. It becomes predictable if you do it too often, though. Also, you can't deploy too close to your missile launch, otherwise you might get hit by a template, and they might both get taken out. I think he's expensive. You've got to spend 1.5 SWCs on him. And there are some other things in the faction that you might want to be taking. I mean, you want to put the Fusilier SWCs in there already. You want to be taking a Bulleteer or a Swiss Guard or a Tag. Sometimes even multiple of those things. So if you still have SWCs left over, sure. Or if you have a particular plan for him, sure. Or if you're playing on a table where he's going to get some really good opportunities to deploy. But I just want to stress that he's just not going to be like of gold value every single game, especially against people who are competent players. He's good. I don't think there's any. I can't really deny that he's a good trooper. He's useful. I just find he's just another reminder that this faction has a lot of things that are inferior to other factions' toys, other people's stuff. When I play CA, I definitely recommend the Noctifer. I mean, that's if you have the points for it, if you have any justification at all for keeping him in there, keep him in there. Whereas this guy, I feel like I need a bit more justification to have him in there, especially since I already want the hacker in my list anyway. So if you're spending, these 59 points already on 2 hexes, you may not have enough points for other things that you may want. So my priority is the killer hacker. I wouldn't often take the multi-sniper instead of the killer hacker. You might occasionally think of taking them both. Machinist. Yeah, sad thing about this guy is he's willpower 12, and he's still pretty expensive. The argument, though, is that Pan-Oceania might be using more remotes than other factions would normally, and they have very good tags. So that's why the engineer becomes valuable. It's just a shame that he's only got willpower 12. You can now take a Tech B, which makes him willpower 13, but then with the Tech B, you've got to spend 5 additional points on a model that's only irregular. May not always be worth it. If you've got a tag and a machinist, I don't know. We'll talk about the Tech B. Moving on, though, here's the Tech B. Ironically, it's the next choice. So, okay, she's got a flash pulse. I like it. She's a specialist. Willpower 12, though. I feel like for the willpowering, I'm still going to be wanting to use the Hexa Killer Hacker. Or the Diva, if I really have taken a Diva hacker. I'm not going to take a Diva. No, I'm not going to be using the Diva. It's going to be the Hexa. It's going to be the Hexa doing most of the button pressing, or the Pathfinder. Those two models are what we're going to be using. The Tech B, though, you got to spend 5 points for an irregular order, but you can spend 3 points for a Warcore irregular order, and he's still got a Flash Pulse. Warcore's better at Flash Pulse because he's got better willpower. And, I mean, does that 1 point of engineering is that really going to be game-breaking? I mean, if you fail the engineering roll, you can spend another regular order to try it again, because they're probably going into a remote presence level 2. Or you can just spend a command token to re-roll it if you're getting unlucky. I just don't feel like this is an auto-include. It's not one of the better choices you can take. If you've just got a list where you happen to have 5 points spare and you've already got an engineer, sure. I mean, it's not counterproductive. You're not killing yourself by taking this model. It's just I don't feel like she's one of the things you put in your list first. You design a list, and then if you really feel like the Tech B adds to it somehow, okay. Most of the time, though, you're going to be putting in something like a PAL bot, or you put in the Warcore or something like that. Trauma Dog. Again, willpower 12. Kind of sucks, It's not like you're playing Hakaslam here. I mean, she's not a very good unit in a vacuum, but you still take her because Pan-Oceania have some models which are of higher value when you revive them. So let's say you've got a Janzaban, or Janbazan as I should call them. Yes, the Hakaslam Doctor is more likely to revive the Janbazan, but the Janbazan isn't as valuable a revival as your Swiss Guard is, or your Aquila Guard is, right? Or your Fusilier missile launcher. So if the Trauma Dock brings back something of that value, you know, it's been more impactful. It's actually been more of a swing in the game than that Hakkaslam revival was, which is partly why I think there's a bit of a disparity there. The Trauma Dock finds it more difficult. I've played so many games where the Trauma Dock just fails and fails and fails after all those whip checks. It's a bit embarrassing, but yeah, if you increase to willpower much more, I think it would be, yeah, it would take away one of this faction's weaknesses and sort of make the things that are already strong about the faction a little bit stronger. I don't think it's needed. I don't think it's really needed. Warcore, after Interplanetario, I realized that people are attacking these a lot more than I thought. Some people put these in the list sort of earlier than like leaving it to the last and seeing if you have 3 points left over. What I usually do is I usually take a Palbot or something like that. But the Warcore are definitely very good, especially if you are, stripping your opponent of more than one order to kill him. It's probably better to start arrowing later in the game rather than just straight away. But if he only lasts one face-to-face roll and your opponent just kills him straight away, I don't feel like he's been worth it. But sometimes he's going to get a crit flash pulse or something and be golden. Okay, so we've reached that time in the video where it's time to talk about the bolts. The bolts. The bolts. I don't know if you guys read the forums. Do you guys read the forums? There are so many threads on the forums about making bolts work, and I want to make the point that, in fact, little story here. I don't know if you guys play a computer game called Hearthstone. It's a Blizzard game. It's a collectible trading card game. And there are a lot of options in that game which are very good, and there are some which are really terrible. And the guy, Ben Brode, who was one of the lead designers, he came out and tried to give an explanation of why they still allow some things to be bad. And their reasoning was that, well, some people like to try and do well and try to win with the underpowered things. That is fun for some people. And I was thinking, well, I kind of get that, actually. To be honest, it's more fun and more gratifying and more fascinating to try and look at an underpowered profile and think, how do I put that into my list? And how do I make that work? And how would I feel if I could win with that? And be the guy who shows up heroically to the forums and to Facebook and says, haha, I've been making this underpowered unit work. And that's very appealing to some people. That's actually very, kind of appetizing. I don't think CB are that smart. I don't think that they've deliberately made a crappy unit and put it into Pan-Oceania. I think that, people in Corvus Belli probably think, well, bolts are really good. And I think a lot of people in the forums probably also think, well, they're actually really good. They're not. They're not. You can try and make them work, and they can be usable. But we're gonna break this down, and we're gonna talk about it. Remember, the golden rule in this, guys, is that Fireteam Core is something which is sort of exclusive. You can only have it on one thing at a time. And we're being asked to choose between taking a link team of bolts or a link team of Fusiliers. I will talk about soon my list with both of them, but most of the time you're going to be taking like your 63-point unit of Fusiliers, which are Blister Skill 12, they are cheap as chips, they've got everything you need. We're spending like twice as much on the bolt team without getting twice as much value. And that's the only argument that I think needs to be made. But, people on the forums are not going to agree. People are going to say, well, they've got the shotguns and the drop bears, and they've got this and they've got that, and veteran level 1, whatever. It comes down to whether you're getting twice as much value as the Fusiliers with these rules. And I've got to say, though, the models look good. I love them. I'd love to paint these models. They look really cool, and they'd make good conversions too. If you want to convert them and mix, match, and kit batch with the Fusiliers, go ahead. But let's talk about them. Damn, are they expensive? Why are they so expensive? And it's because they've been given some extra rules. But the thing is, the value that you get out of the extra rules will not justify their cost, and that's the argument we're making here. The pleb bolt, the basic one with a combi rifle and light shotgun, 22 points. We can already see that the Blister Skill 13. You could get a Fusilier for Blister Skill 10. So what are we paying the extra 12 points for? It's not 1 point of Blister Skill. If that was the only increase, then I'm pretty sure we could all agree that they're not really worth it. The other thing is that you're also getting like a lower movement value compared to the Fusiliers. So, if anything, I mean, if it was just Ballistic Skill 13 versus Movement 4-2, I mean, you might even argue that they should be cheaper than the Fusiliers. The thing I like about the Fusiliers is you can use them defensively early in the game, and then later in the game, at least when I'm playing, I almost always move them out. I actually just charge across the battlefield and shoot things with a combi rifle. You cannot do that as effectively with as many orders when you're, 25% slower. So what else have we got here? The willpower hasn't increased. We've got +1 armor. Armor doesn't make a massive difference until you get above a critical mass threshold of like 4 or 5. But, we're not going to say no to a little bit more armor. That's okay. BTS 6 doesn't come up very much because you're not getting shot at with nanopulses and breaker rifles all day. It's mostly HMGs. Bioimmunity, though, is what makes the BTS good, because if somebody's shooting shock rounds at you, you're suddenly armor 6 instead of armor 2. The thing is, your opponent can control that, right? If they've got a tag, they can just shoot armor-piercing rounds, and suddenly you're back to sort of, Fusilier level armor. They don't have to fire shock rounds at you. Or if they've got a Bulleteer, they don't have to put assisted fire on it if they know they're shooting at the bolts. So a smart opponent won't really get you to let you use bioimmunity very much. Veteran level 1 means that you get to ignore the effects of isolation and loss of lieutenant kind of thing. Some people say, well, this allows you to be a bit more aggressive with lieutenant. That is false. You still don't want to lose your lieutenant because, most of your army is not going to have this rule. You can't take an army with just bolts. It would be ridiculous just to take like 20 of these guys and call that your list. That's not going to happen. You're going to take some of these guys and some, robots and Swiss Guard or whatever other models that aren't going to be immune to loss of lieutenant. So losing your lieutenant is still going to be disastrous in spite of this rule. You might say, well, okay, they can't be isolated, but again, they're not really going to be isolation targets. They are good against guys in Motiwa, but really, I mean, you're going to be going so far up the field, you're going to be getting into close combat battles with guys in Motiwa. You're just going to get hit by Emirates and chain rifles, and you're just going to die. So I don't feel like your veteran level 1 is something which you're going to get consistent value out of at all. Then there's their kit. So they've got light shotguns. Awesome. But the problem with that is that they are slow. You're going to spend all of those orders moving out to the middle of the table and then AOing with your light shotguns or attacking with the light shotguns when you could just be doing that with something else. You could just be attacking with your Bulleteer or your Pathfinder or your Garuda light shotgun or even your Swiss Guard missile launcher shotgun. All of those units are just so much more effective than these guys are at that. Drop bears, I think, is the only thing about this unit which is interesting to me. The link team allows you to throw more than one drop bear at a time. I find it a little bit awkward that you've got 3 drop bears and your burst will let you shoot 2 of them. The next go you actually have to shoot 1 of them because you've only got 1 left. I feel that's kind of stupid, but if I was to play these guys, I would probably go with like 2 or 3 drop bear guys, maybe move them out a little bit, throw a huge minefield of drop bears, and then try and play the game that way. Don't love it though. Drop bears, I believe, can be shot at without having to be revealed. Your opponent could just move 1 crazy koala or mad trap to clear them out, or a hollow echo model to clear them out, or just a dodging Dachiratsu or something like that to clear them out. And what you've done there by creating a minefield, is it enough to mitigate or make up for the fact that your whole army is overcosted and you've just got such a smaller army list in terms of value than your opponent? If you just use these guys defensively, you're sitting there with your missile launcher and you've got maybe a lieutenant there and you've got a hacker and you play them like they were a Fusilier team, you take a couple of cheap guys with EM grenades, that's 114 points. It's literally nearly twice as much as the Fusilier team is. I find that it's just disgusting. The hacker does have EM grenades. Sorry, the boarding shotgun guy does have EM grenades. So that's something. Okay, so EM grenades, you can use your physical stat of 11 plus 3 for being a link team. You can spec fire. That's kind of cool. But the 4-2 speed. So you're not going to go from your deployment zone all the way over to where they're tag sitting and then throw the EM grenade and maybe get it off on them, because you're ending the turn with all of you guys just sitting out there. Maybe you put a few mines down, but your opponent has their entire army to deal with that, and in Infinity you have a number of different tools for sorting that out. And this is something you're doing instead of picking up objectives and actually shooting enemy models. I just think these guys are garbage. They're really, really crappy. What could we do to improve them? I first of all think that they could use a points decrease across the board. I think that there could be a special character that comes out, even a new Diafo character which can link with them, that has something unique that only it can have. Imagine if you could take a Neoterra character with like a jammer, and normally Hakaslam are the only faction that can have that, and suddenly you've got a jammer in Pan-Oceania. But it's on a model that you wouldn't really want to take unless, you know, you're gaining some benefits from the link. So at least then he'd have something that you can't get elsewhere. Or let's say he's Blizzard skill 14, so in the link he's Blizzard skill 17, so you've got that real superiority of being a Neoterra. Or what if you had a special link team that could include an Orc Trooper, and the only way that you can get that Orc Trooper to Blizzard skill 17 is by having Neoterra bolts. So you get a very expensive list, but at least you've got something super, you know, heavy duty shooty with it, which it's flavorful. It's in the theme of this faction. I think that would be cool. If we just pause for a moment and talk about Imperial Service, Imperial Service can take a Crane in a link team with Celestial Guards. It can do that cheaply. You've got a Nanopulsar with him. You've got Blister Skill 13 with an X-Visor, becomes Blister Skill 16. He's got the Spitfire. You know, you can still have smoke light grenade launchers. You can have 20 orders in that list. I mean, it's just crazy. And then you got, okay, this is Cien Warrior, which can be in a link team with Zanying. So you've got a guy standing in a cloud, Blister Skill 14 with 5 dice HMG, or you can make these link teams with Bow Troopers and Pheasants and so forth. And there's all of this variety. Why can't NCA have that? Like, it wouldn't be too powerful. I mean, even if you put the Orc Trooper with these guys, or even an Aquila Guard with these guys, it wouldn't be game-breakingly powerful. You might think it would be, like, on paper, but when you actually come and play games with something like that, you'd find it's still more expensive than it should be. And the faction doesn't have smoke anyway, so it's not really going to be that wonderful, but at least it's some tools. At least it's a bit of a, you know, platform to work with. So I'm just disappointed with bolts. I didn't actually get a chance to play them. I came up with one list I was going to run, but I was just disgusted with it. I just couldn't fit enough stuff in it. If we just very quickly look at it, what's a list I might run? I mean, you can take the Spitfire, maybe we take a couple of drop bear guys. Let's say we take the boarding shotgun and take a specialist as well. I guess the hacking device guy's better because he's got the M grenades. It's 27 points though. I mean, we're at 120. What else do you run, really? I mean, he's got a hacking device. Maybe you run the Bulleteer as well. Or, okay, what if we just take... see, I'm really struggling with this. Killer hacking device. We'll take a couple of CSUs to bulk up the points with. Fugazis, we definitely want them. So 1, 2, 3. Just want to have as many orders there as we can. Want a Bulleteer in there, of course. Haven't really spent much time on this list, as you guys can tell. We've got a Pathfinder in there. May as well take a Doctor. Still got a bunch of points left. I think we'll grab a Garuda Spitfire. And still the list is sort of missing a Swiss Guard at this point, something I would usually field in there. Yeah, I feel like we reach our limit a little bit too quickly. Anyway, I'm not going to slow the video down by just sitting here thinking for a while, so let's go on to the next unit. The Pan-Oceanian Black Friars. So these guys are fairly recent, and they're available, I believe, for military orders as well. So what do we think of them? Again, it's medium infantry, and as you guys know, I mean, if you've been watching my videos for a while, I think you've figured out by now that I'm not the world's biggest fan of medium infantry. Is there even a picture of them in the old Pan-Oceania lineup? I just don't see him. Looking at the wrong one. We're going to go to Neoterra. Here he is here. He does look kind of cool. He's got a kind of weird pose. I don't really know what he's trying to do with his sword there. Alright, so the multi-sniper is a bit like the NIS sniper. You've got MSV2, Blister Skill 13. He's movement to a 4-2 like the NIS sniper is, but he doesn't have mimetism. So it's almost like this guy is giving this sub-faction a NIS sniper that's not as good as a NIS sniper. I don't love him. Um, you can put a Tromadoc next to him to help, but if you're using it as an ARO piece, it's better to use the Swiss missile or the Fusilier missile, in my opinion. And if you're attacking with them, well, it's probably better to use that Diva MSV2 or the the Aquila Guard with HMG, because those are better, active turn shooters or a Bulletier. So for those reasons, I don't really feel like the multi-sniper really fits that purpose. He's got a nanopulsar. Like, do you really need it from that far away? I mean, he's usable. I'm not going to complain if people put him in their lists, and I might find him hard to deal with if I'm fighting against him, if he passes a lot of armor saves. But he's just a little bit redundant. I feel. I don't feel like he's. Let's talk about the next profile. So the next guy is a bit more interesting because he's got a biometric visor, and let's say something about that. Biometric visor is something which makes it easier to discover an impersonator. But the thing is, if your opponent has an impersonator, they're probably going first, and they're probably going to be attacking by the time you've discovered. And if you're going first, they're not going to put their impersonator next to your Blackfire to let you discover them. That's not going to be happening, is it? So I don't feel like this is a very good ability. It's actually overcosted. The albedo. Now we're talking. So that is an interesting rule. If your opponent is using MSV2 and they're just using it as an arrow piece, like in their sniper on their side or something like that, that is going to be, how should I put it? That's an opportunity. So you can come out there and you can get good line of sight. You can shoot them up pretty easily. It's almost like being in white noise and so forth. Yeah, the thing about him is that he's a bit predictable. I mean, he starts in deployment zone with movement 4-2, so even if they've got something on the other side up against him, he's got to get into range first. So let's say they are hanging out with their intruder or whatever, he's got to actually move out into range of the intruder before really having a good chance to actually put him down. Yeah, the multi-rifle's okay, but again, it's 28 points for him. This guy, he's only got a single wound. The drop bears, nanopulsar. I mean, I feel like he's got too much kit. He's not going to get value out of it all at once, and is he going to get 28 points worth of value out of it? I'm just concerned. Again, it's one of these units that wants to play a particular role, but doesn't play any specific role as well as some other unit. And I feel like Infinity is one of these games where specialization is a bit more important than versatility. So it's better to have a list with one or two models which are really, really good at attacking things, like a Swiss Guard machine gun or a Bulleteer, and then lots of things with just low points, guys good at defending, good at providing orders, or specialist things which are only good at really pressing buttons or hacking or what have you. Whereas the Black Friar, I'm just not too sure if he does any of those particularly well. If he's just hanging out in your deployment zone doing nothing, well, you should have just taken a Fugazi. If he's going out and spending all of his orders just charging through Suicide Squad, going to kill enemy models, well, you should be doing that with a Bulleteer or a Garuda or a Swiss Guard. And if he's going to be just sitting there and AROing, well, it's better to be using a Swiss missile or a Fusilier missile launcher. That's sort of how I feel about him. He might be throwing some drop bears around, but really, I mean, that's what you're going to pay 28 points for. I don't really love him. There are other models in the game which have albedo. Only thing that comes to mind straight away is the Overdron. The Overdron is much better at using albedo because he's got a longer range gun to go with albedo. And usually to get rid of big, scary, powerful targets, your opponent would put down smoke and then fire through the smoke at him. And he gets around that. So, yeah. Don't love the Pan-Oceania Black Friar, sadly. I know he's a cool model, but I just don't think that he was designed particularly well. I think that maybe CB were a bit careful in trying to make him to be not too powerful, or try not to make him more powerful than the other things that are already out in the game. The Aquila Guard. Yeah. Thing about the Aquila Guard is he's got a lot of models already, a lot of different sculpts, and some people prefer the old sculpts, some people prefer the new sculpts. I've spoken to at least one or two people who don't like the fact that the guy's like completely space armor, space marine style, but he's got a cape. That's a very Games Workshop thing to do, and a lot of people don't like that. I think it's fine. I think he looks cool. I prefer this model to the other older Aquila Guard models. But hey, it's personal preference. Thing about MSV3 is that it's a bit overcosted at the moment. You don't often get the value of free discoveries and ignoring surprise attack. If you're just using this guy to stand up and ARO people, well, a single HMG is usually going to do the job on him. I mean, if your opponent's got something like a Mobile Brigada with an HMG shooting 4 dice ballistical 13s and you're shooting back with 1 dice ballistical 15, you're still going to lose. You're going to get shot up. And if you're attacking, well, you've got to walk around the other side of the board, do that shooting. But the saving grace I feel that this guy has is that if your opponent doesn't have any heavy weapons because they're playing a version of Ariadna or Hakaslam or Nomads that doesn't have anything particularly grunty anywhere near him, and they're just having to shoot him with like Spitfires and so forth, he might be able to ARO for a while, drop down prone behind some cover, or have a trauma doc revive him and really slow them down. Or if they like moving around the table with lots of camo markers because they're playing Ariadna, well, you're just discovering here and there, and if they decide to shoot at you, well, cool, you usually survive because you've got armor, you've got cover, you've got a trauma doc. So that's where he can be kind of cool. The multi-rifle, not so much, because again, as you guys know, I don't really love short-range weapons that start in your deployment zone that are meant to be fighting units, that are meant to be, actually getting a lot of work done. So the only reason I don't think the Aquila Guard is top-notch is that he always ends up being inferior once you analyze him next to something like the Swiss Guard, because with the Swiss Guard, you're almost as good as at shooting that ARO back. I mean, in some circumstances, you're better. But the marker state means you get to choose which situations you're advantageous in, whereas the Aquila Guard gives a little more power to your opponent. Swiss Guard also, obviously the marker state grants you stealth. These models are a little bit vulnerable to hacking, and in your active turn, you can use your TO camo to give you advantages against the models you want to kill. You don't necessarily have to go after like a Marut or something with MSV2 and an ability to arrow you. You can ignore those models in favor of models you're more easily able to kill. So you end up generally getting a bit more work done with them. I like him though. I find it hard not to like the HMG model and the HMG version. And I did run him a couple of times in my games with him, and I don't mind sort of playing him in Pan-Oceania vanilla as well. It's just a shame that he's a little bit more expensive than he really should be after you play him a lot. You look at the Cien Warrior, who isn't quite as good at this guy in a vacuum, but you've got Smoke. So I don't want to talk too much in this video about Smoke in general, but a lot of people agree that if Pan-Oceania did have Smoke, that they'd see a lot of value from these models, and this guy would be quite powerful shooting from Smoke, obviously, but that's just not something which Pan-Oceania are destined to have. I don't know what more to say about him, to be honest. I mean, I really wouldn't want to take the Lieutenant version of him because he's meant to be fighting. You've got no chain of command. Yeah, no executive order or anything like that. Orc troops. So these guys come with the starter pack, of course, and you can get the old school versions of them. Yeah, I think you guys know how I feel about models like this. Again, list building and model evaluation is all about the roles that things play. And with Orc troops, again, you're going for a model that is supposed to be doing fighting. That's supposed to be going out and attacking or shooting with ARO bullets, for example. And rather than playing with one of these guys and doing all of your shooting and attacking with that model and having more points available for other things, it's just more efficient to spend that extra amount of points on making him a ballistical 15 guy that either has MS3 V3 or camo. Interestingly, if I have to rate them in terms of desirability and how often you take them in lists, Swiss Guard comes first, followed by the Aquila, then the Orc Trooper. So the Aquila is something I feel is a middle ground between those two, but the Orc Trooper I think is the lowest, because he's very expensive, but he doesn't come with any rules. He doesn't come up with any abilities which give him value in those face-to-face shootouts. So even when you're walking around with your HMG and you're 20 points cheaper, because you've got no MSV3 and you've got no TO camera or anything like that, what's happening is that you are missing out on 20 points of value in a big way, in the sense that you're coming into face-to-face roles where you're not killing things, or you're losing the occasional face-to-face role that you wouldn't have lost if you've got TO camo or if you've got MSV3. Going through some of the profiles here, having multi-rifle is kind of cool, but again, it's a model that starts in deployment zones very slow and has got to actually get there first. Yeah, he's got a deflector, but the thing is, if people are hacking you anyway, you're at a disadvantage. You may as well just go with a Hexa or something that can't be hacked. The assault hacking device. Yeah, what you're doing there is just giving yourself a vulnerability against killer hackers. This is a guy who is willpower 12. You really think you're going to be like possessing tags and things effectively with that willpower? I don't really think so. Again, Lieutenant, same problem this faction suffers from. No chain of command. You've got nothing to really mitigate the fact that your lieutenant dies and you're a lost lieutenant. I mean, unless you're going to run orc troopers and bolts, but we've just talked about why bolts aren't even that great. I want to be able to like these guys. They've got a really cool model. They've got Ballistical 14. They are the kind of unit that Pan-Oceania is all about, the sort of shooting superiority, but they just don't really do that. In this faction, you can take a Haris, an Orc Harris, but it's way too expensive. You're basically tripling their cost for getting an extra dice and shooting. When instead of tripling their cost, you should just take a Swiss Guard. If you've got that many points, you should take a guy that's already +1 blister skill and has TO camo or has MSV3. So that's what you should be doing. You should never take the Haris team. It just doesn't work. What I think would be cool is if you could create a special Harris team with an Orc Trooper +2 bolts. Or maybe you can get the Black Friar in there. Just that would mean you're using those other models and this model more, and it's a more interesting Harris team. Somebody in the forum said to me that based on the fluff, you couldn't really put them with CSUs, but I mean the CSU's an ideal unit to put with the Orc Trooper. That would actually be a really cool team, because you have you're having models that you're using as cheerleaders anyway, but you get it giving the Orc +1 burst. So then he might be useful. You take the Orc HMG +2 CSUs on a special Harris Link team. That would actually be quite effective. It'll be a bit more efficient then, because you're spending the points and you're getting more dice, so you're actually getting more done. You're a bit more efficient in that regard. I don't want to talk about these guys too much more. Let's go to the real fighting kings, the masters, the head honchos, the Swiss Guard. Unfortunately, all of the Swiss Guard models that are really good are the old sculpts. I don't know what to say about the new guy with the sword. I'm sure you guys have all seen him in the Beyond Ice Storm box. I think he's kind of funny, but at the end of the day, it is a little bit silly that he's got a massive sword and he doesn't really fight in close combat. And if he's supposed to be a stealthy unit that wouldn't really carry that sword around anyway. So it is kind of silly. I don't know why this page that's supposed to be for NCA doesn't actually have a Swiss Guard on it, unless I've failed to see it somehow. I'm sure you guys all know what a Swiss Guard looks like. So, Swiss Guard is something which is available in normal Pan-Oceania anyway. The only reason I think that he's better in NCA is that NCA is better at spamming the cheerleaders, because you've got NCUs and you've still got the three availability for Gazis, and you're going to take the Fusilier Link team. Whereas in normal Pan-Oceania, you're probably not going to take 5 Fusiliers. So with that in mind, given that you can get to 16, 17, up to 20 orders, having a Swiss Guard becomes very effective there, because you've got enough orders to go on a lot of runs with them and put them back into Marcus State, and those attacks are just so much more efficient because of Ballistical 15. When I compare this guy to his nearest competitor, the most comparable thing in the game to this guy is the Hack Tau with Yu Qing. The Hack Tau is better in close combat and has a nanopulsar, but is -1 ballistic skill. Now, which would I prefer? I would prefer the ballistic skill any day of the week, because that is the role that this unit's designed to play. The role is to either come out of hidden deployment and shoot them as an ARO, or into your turn, move into line of sight of them and get into a face-to-face role. And you don't really want to be missing any shots, because the more shots you miss, the more orders you're going to spend retrying that face-to-face role, right? So I feel like this guy's optimal. You know, he's got the armor and the BTS and the wounds. He's got the cubes. You've got the trauma doc which can revive him. He doesn't need to be in close combat. Physical 14 makes him really survivable, but the ballistic skill 15 makes him as efficient as possible. So the HMG, probably my favorite profile here. Although after actually playing 11 games with this faction, I'm not so sure. I think the missile launcher is probably on par with the HMG in terms of desirability. So let's talk about them. The guy with just the multi-rifle, no. Because you start near deployment zone and you're slow, you should be using the HMG. I've made that point a few times. You may want to take the assault hacker, we'll talk about him in a moment, but my top two profiles are the HMG and the missile launcher. HMG, I think I've made my point about this guy. He is very efficient. You know, you start where you're supposed to start. You're at the range bands you want to be at. If your opponent's left anything visible at all, you kill them, and your opponent can't kill him back very easily because of his ability. The missile launcher, though, I find this even more interesting because, first of all, he's hidden deployment, so your opponent doesn't know which lane he's coming from. When he does reveal and they start attacking him with like a Jan Bazan and smoke or whatever, he can take the hit. He's armor 8 in cover with the 5+3, and he can drop prone behind cover, and he can have a trauma doc heal him up. So for your opponent to attack him, they have to spend so many resources actually taking him down, and they might not even succeed at that. If they get unlucky and you crit them, well, you know, you're at a massive advantage. So unless you're playing on some really dense tables, I think this guy is actually really exceptional. There are a lot of cases where you want your opponent to shoot at you, just because they're going to be wasting so many orders if they don't kill him, and it's not very likely they're just going to wipe him out. In some situations, the game might be getting a bit desperate, and you can actually move out across the battlefield and shoot with a light shotgun. So I'm so glad he actually had something to use at that short range, because anything beyond 8 inches, you can actually even use the missile launcher. I think the rule would be I'd use the shotgun at between 8 to 16. But once it gets a bit further past that, you're willing to drop down to your burst 1 to use the missile launcher. Yeah, I think he's such a fantastic unit. The thing about him is that usually he takes up too many points, but with NCA, you could afford to spend all those points on him and still have so many orders left in the army because of your cheap backup units. Lastly, the hacker. I did play the hacker in one of my games, but I used him for limited insertion because I wanted to be able to make up the points. I didn't want to sort of compromise the list by having too many sort of smaller things spread out, and not really get a lot of value out of the models I was going to be spending orders on, and I needed a specialist that was going to be in TO camo. The Hexa wasn't enough, so I did put him in that particular list, but I think most of the time the Swiss Guard hacker isn't ideal, because with the prevalence of killer hacking devices these days, you give your opponent a bit of an out. You give your opponent a way to get rid of a 70-point model, which is just red rum, right? So all I've got to do is reveal him and put a repeater next to him, or have a killer hacker next to him if he moves out into the battlefield, and that's unfortunately something he has to do. You need to leave your deployment zone and go out there to actually do some shooting with, and once you get too far out there, your opponent can land a pitcher next to you, or have a killer hacker there, or bring up a bot and get him that way. So even with BTS 6, I don't love it. I mean, the multi-rifle gives you shock, which is cool, and you've got a double action round for AROing, but again, this is a 70-point unit, and you kind of want to get 70 points worth out of him. If you're mainly thinking about using him for pressing buttons, well, he doesn't do that any more efficiently than a Pathfinder or a Hexa killer hacker does. So, looking back at this profile, HMG or missile launcher number 1. I think that they're tied. One of them's first, one of them's second for me. The hacker number 3, and the regular multi-rifle I just wouldn't really take. Excellent unit though, and I think that if you're serious about playing NCA, you should really be playing these guys as much as possible, to be honest. Next up, the Ulan. Very rare tag with Marcus State, but he's expensive. You're paying nearly 100 points. So you better be getting 100 points worth out of that. I think the primary criticism of this model is that your Swiss Guard is doing a similar role as he is, and I agree with that criticism. Your Swiss Guard is Ballistic Skill 15 as well. This guy does not have a multi-HMG like many tags do, yet he's paying the cost that many tags do. So the Swiss Guard is giving you the same shooting output, but the Swiss Guard's like 30 points cheaper. So that 30 points, you're getting the extra speed, you're getting the Feuerwerk for returning fire, and you're getting a little bit more armor and an extra, wound effectively, so extra structure point. The Clausewitz Uland is bigger. He can't go prone, and he's got camouflage instead of Teo camo. So it's almost like once you take into all of these things into account, the Swiss Guard should almost be the same points as this guy. That's sort of how I feel about it. The Swiss Guard cannot be possessed. The Ulan can be possessed. This guy gets a little specialist, but he's a willpower 10 specialist. So after all the back and forward debating here, I just feel like, yeah, a case can be made to say that the Ulan is just a bit more valuable. You get a bit more out of him, but you don't get like 30 points more out of him. So at the end of the day, I think that if you're a serious NCA player, you should really be scratching pretty hard to come up with a justification for taking this guy more often than the Swiss Guard. I think the only time where I would advocate taking this model instead of a Swiss Guard would be one of those missions where you get more objective points for scoring with a tag. Then you can take him, because the 30 points that you're investing above and beyond that Swiss Guard is potentially game winning in the sense you get more objective points from the scenarios. Deadly Dance, Show of Force, well then he's okay because he can survive in the places he's supposed to survive with his marker state, and the Swiss Guard couldn't achieve that. So that's about it. Other than that, if it's just a straight plain up firefight or supplies or frontline or whatever it is, the Swiss Guard's going to be your better choice there, because he's basically the equivalent in terms of battlefield presence and fighting, close to it, but way cheaper. It doesn't have that liability of being possessed. Scarface and Cordelia we're going to skip. They're not really a Pan-Oceania unit, and I don't know if they'll be around in tagline forever. So let's talk about the Squalo. So we just talked about the old the Ulan. That's this guy on the right here. That's the Aquila Guard. So the Squalos. Some people really love this guy. I think that he's okay. I played one game with him, and I feel a bit embarrassed because the one game that I did play with him, it was a game where my camera battery died, so I couldn't do a bat rip, but I should have done one because it was really interesting. You guys might have watched that video where I played in tagline, and the only game I lost was up against a Hexas player, and he went on to win. But we had a rematch the following week where I was playing NCA again. He was playing that same list with Tariq, with Fatality and El Jabal and so on, and I played a Squalo. And my plan was, if I got first turn, I would take it and just bombard him. But if I got second turn, then I would just use this guy as the reserve trooper and just have him not die. So as it happened, I didn't get first turn, so I didn't use speculative fire even a single time. Obviously, if you are going to play this model, you're going to be taking the heavy grenade launcher. I mean, it's not too much more expensive, an extra 0.5 SWC, but yeah, I mean, if you're not going to take any of the other two profiles, trust me. It's going to be the heavy grenade launcher because that's what this guy is all about. Back to the game, though. What happened was that he moved out with Tariq and killed a bunch of guys, and El Jabal also got a couple of kills, but didn't kill my lieutenant. So in my follow-up turn, and this was engineering deck, by the way, this Squalo goes running around the battlefield, kills Tariq, and sets up in a position where he's basically dominating the back line of Hexas, and on an angle where he would be really sweeping. So my opponent gets out his smoke, gets out his Janzaban, and goes to shoot me. But I'd planned that in such a way that I'd be tanking the armor saves, and once I did take a wound or two, I'd just fall back behind cover, denying him really a whole turn there. But fortunately, I got a crit and just knocked out his Janzaban straight away. So then he moves up with a Ghazi and spends the rest of his orders in that turn trying to jammer me or Emirat me, and only on his final order did he manage to actually get me immobilized. So on my turn, the engineer starts running around the battlefield, it eventually gets there, revives the Squalo goes to work, and ends up being a win. So it was a fun game, but it didn't really have anything to do with you know, what's special about the Squalo, and that's speculative fire. The thing about speculative fire is that you start up ballistic skill 15, which is great, and you're -6 for spec fire, but you're at 0 range band most of the time with your gun because it's such a long-ranged 0 range band. So if you feel like you are able to find opportunities where your opponent is clumped up, or if they've got a very obvious lieutenant, then this guy can be good. The reason why I don't love him personally, why he doesn't really fit my style, is that sometimes you're going to be a little bit beholden to the turn order. That might not exactly suit you too well. Sometimes you're going to get a little bit unlucky, and there's just nothing really you can do to come back from a game where you put all of your orders into trying to spec fire and you just didn't manage to get any kills with it. That can all too easily come up. And then thirdly, a lot of enemy stuff is not going to be susceptible to it. You're going to come up against some armies which are going to have like camo markers spread out, and models which are resilient against the grenade launcher, like Toha, for example, going to be very resilient with their symbiomates and their symbiont armor and stuff like that. The crab bot has got such low willpower, that's not going to come up too much, and this guy's a whopping amount of points, 95 points. So I don't think this is one of the best things in the faction. Is it usable? Of course it's usable. Like, you're gonna have some games where he does well. I think he's especially good against players that like to hide a lot of stuff and clump stuff up, and they take a lot of units, and the battlefields don't let them spread out too much. If you're playing with certain kind of terrain, he's going to be very useful for that. My recommendation, if you're going to play that way and you're going to move out speculative fire, just move out spec fire for a bit and then pull back a bit, and don't leave him on their half of the table. Just put him in a position where he's going to aero with his multi-HMG for a long clean line, have your mechanic next to him, and trick them into, set a trap for them to actually try and shoot him, as well as you shooting back, and make them waste their orders on what's arguably his best stat, which is armor 8. That's really what I think defines tags for me, is not the structure points or the ballista skill or the type of gun they have, just the fact that they have so much armor that your opponent could potentially just waste so many orders and be so ineffective with their turn trying to kill him, only for you to repair him because he's got remote presence or because he can fall back behind some sort of cover. So that's really how he plays. If you're really going to play the non-grenade launcher version of him, I mean, you're basically paying for like a Guija that has one more bliss skill and a whole lot extra points. The thing about the Guija is just so well supported by all the Yujing, you know, warbands and units like that. And he's got a better specialist inside of him as well. So yeah, the Squalo, maybe I'll give him a 6 or a 7 out of 10. He's not like the best unit in the game, but nor is he like unusable. I wouldn't really put him as in the same category as the Deva or the Black Friar or the Locust, or definitely not the Bolts. I mean, he's sort of above them, but not as good as the Fusiliers and the Bulleteer and the Swiss Guard and the Hexa. Speaking of Bulleteers, this is one of the best units in the game. I almost always take the Spitfire profile because when you're moving out and you're that fast, you don't really want to use the heavy shotgun to get into exchanges. You want to be killing a lot of things and moving around the battlefield and surviving until the end of the turn. The thing that makes the Bulleteer so powerful is assisted fire. It gives him shock. It gives him the ability to ignore cover. So a lot of the time he's sitting on 15s with 5 dice, and if he hits something, it's removed so they can't doctor it back, and he destroys things with NWI. And he's winning those face-to-face rolls because of the optical disruptor. He's very comparable to the Rushi, but one advantage that he has over the Rushi is that you don't need to spend any orders putting the smoke down first. So he's quicker at doing that, and sometimes you can get into little angles and positions that you couldn't have really got the smoke into first. He's also a little bit more resistant in your reactive turn than the Rushi is, because he's just sitting there in cover with ODD, so your opponent has to come and get that, whereas the Rushi hasn't had the smoke put down first when he's reacting. if you're playing Pan-Oceania in general, you should get one of these guys, and you should use the Spitfire option. Heavy shotgun, I think it's just a waste. I mean, if you're going to be spending that many orders moving around the table, well, you could have been doing that same thing with the Spitfire. So if you're going to take both of them, for example, well, you're only going to spend orders on one or the other, so it may as well be the Spitfire one. I ran, in that tagline tournament, a list which had 2 of them. So 20 orders, 2 Spitfires, you've got the hacking device there, and the point of that list was that if your opponent negates the orders from one group with the command token, you've still got a group of 10 to move out with, right? And as soon as you've finished killing them with one guy, you put the hacking device program assisted fire onto the other Bulleteer, and then you keep moving out. And your opponent needs to work so hard to survive against that. If they've set up some long-range aero pieces to defend because they're further away than the Spitfire can shoot, well, you use your HMG and your Fusilier link team. And if they've hidden everything, you just keep zipping around until you find the right angles to kill them with. So I found that very, very effective. I also liked the synergy that these guys had with the Alive team because of the repeater, but of course the Alive team may be going away, but that doesn't mean that you can't use your killer hacker Hexa with the repeater by just moving within range of something that they have, which is a vulnerable hacker. And even if they do have something like Blackguard or whatever, I mean, chances are with BTS3 and a reset, you might be able to survive through that and then hack them. So all round, he's just such a good unit that he just overshadows so many other things in this faction. When he only costs 23 points and 1 SWC, there are so many other things that you sort of get for that same sort of price, which just don't come anywhere near that. You look at the Black Friar, and it's like, there's no comparison. This guy's cheaper than the Black Friar, you just got to pay the extra SWC, but he's way better at killing things. The Diva, Spitfire, cool. You know, you got MSV3, but this guy's got ODD, which arguably is better in a lot of cases, and he's cheaper. He's better at shooting, he's faster. So I can't think of any reason why you wouldn't have a Bulleteer. I think the only time you don't actually run him is that if you're just funneling all of your points into one of the tags, or you may be taking 2 Swiss Guards. I tried that recently with 2 Swiss Guards, didn't work too well. My preferred list after this experiment with, say, 10 or 11 games is to take 1 Swiss Guard and 1 Bulleteer, or even 2 Bulleteers. But I think optimally, you got the Link team with the Fusiliers, got the Swiss Guard, got the Bulleteer, and that's a versatile list. You got something which is fast, you got something which is, you know, very superior in terms of shooting. You got guys which are very cheap but very good at trading. Clipper Drone Bolt, we talked about the Smart Missile Launcher not being very good, so we're not going to take any of those. The Fugazis, again, talked about these guys. You want to take 3 of these in your list at all times because they are cheap, got the regular orders out of them, and they can still annoy your opponent with a Flash Pulse, and they can be hard to remove because of mimetism. Excellent unit, and a 6/6 speed repeater. So you can move into zones, you can move into range to get your Hexa hacking through the repeater, through a firewall. I'm jealous that this faction has 3 AVA. I'm not jealous of many other things in the faction, but I'm jealous of that one thing. Garuda. So we miss out on taking the Akali, but that's fine because the Garuda is better than the Akali. The only disadvantage of the Garuda is that it becomes hackable, so you've got to be very careful not to sort of move into their deployment zone around next to any of their remotes, because otherwise you get hacked. But if you can avoid that, well, he's better than most drop troopers because he's 6'4" instead of like 4'2", which is much better. Mimetism is hard to come by with drop troopers. I think only the Tiger has it. Ballistic skill 12, again, some drop troopers don't really have that good ballistic skill, and he's got the usual suite of attacks, right? So he's got the combi, HMG, boarding shotgun, a Spitfire, something for everybody. My favorite, as you know, is the Spitfire because he's almost always at the right range band when he comes on from the side of the table. Closely followed by the combi rifle or the boarding shotgun. Sometimes the boarding shotgun can be very good because it's nice and cheap, and you can sometimes find those opportunities to pick up 2 or 3 guys in the blast template when you're coming on from AD. HMG I don't really recommend because you're playing a faction here which can easily get an HMG into the right ranges to kill things, whereas if he's showing up next to them, you're more likely to be either in the 0 range band or the -8 than you are in the beyond 16. So I recommend taking the Spitfire first and foremost for the Garuda. Alright, moving on. The Mulebot. I don't really feel like the Mulebot really is as needed here because you've got so many other things which can fill out your list with regular orders. You can take the 3 Fugazis, you can take the 2 CSUs, you've got a link team of Fusiliers, right? By then you've got heaps of regular orders built up. You don't really need to put the Minesweeper in your deployment zone because it's really big and fat and easy to kill. It can be handy for baggage. Baggage can be a bit of a double-edged sword, so I'm told, with the points that it that either generates or generates for your opponent. So I'd only take those guys if I was really desperate to get to like a 20 order list and I'd sort of run out of availability for other things. They might be a bit more relevant for that kind of thing once the Alive team drops off. The Evo Hacker, again, don't love this guy except for that one mission which gives you a bonus to willpower checks for pressing buttons because you have an Evo hacking device. He's way more expensive than the Fusilier, and you don't often want to use controlled jump anyway. Like if you're going to land the Garuda at the back of their army and you don't have any spare orders just to put up assisted jump, controlled jump or whatever it's called, I find that hard to believe. You're paying a full 7 points on top of a regular Fusilier, and this guy's harder to hide. Like he's big and fat and can't go prone, and the Fusilier, at least you're going to take him anyway to buff the link team. So I wouldn't really recommend taking the Evo. He's got willpower 13, that's something, but again, you're not going to be doing much hacking. You're not going to be using that willpower very much. The Hexer is going to be doing the offensive hacking. The total reaction combi, I hardly ever find people do this because you've got things to deploy to defend your deployment zone anyway, and you could just take a Sierra drone bot with an HMG TR bot instead with this guy. Palbots, yep, always useful. Don't have too much to say about these dudes. The Pathfinder, like I said before, a bit more relevant in this faction than other factions because willpower 13 is harder to come by, and the sensor and the sat lock and so forth do come up. They're relevant, and he's fast. So in other factions I don't take this guy as much, but in Pano I do tend to take this guy a bit more. Peacemaker, actually kind of interesting because with the Peacemaker, before I started playing NCA, I thought that I was going to take this guy a lot, but it turned out that I ended up not taking him as much as I thought I would. The reason why he didn't end up being at the top of my list, really, is that he's typically more valuable if you're going first, because if you're going first you can make use of that armored deployment or whatever it's called, mechanized deployment, and get up the field, get into position to kill things more quickly with the combination of Spitfire and Auxbot. So if you're going first, that ability affects you and helps you. But if you're going second, you're just putting your model closer to your opponent, make it easier for the infiltrators to kill it, or hack it, or use its repeater for killer hacking. So I don't like that. I don't like units which are only good depending on whether you get turn order in your favor. But even if you are going first, well, the Bulleteer only takes 1 order to get up to the same point in the table that the Peacemaker started from, and the Bulleteer is doing the same fighting but with ODD. So the Peacemaker has the Auxbot in place of ODD. Would you rather have the Auxbot or would you rather have ODD? I don't know. I mean, the Auxbot gets in a position, attacks, and people dodge. Or if you're moving the Peacemaker and it's shooting, but the Auxbot's shooting at the flamethrower, well, great, but these situations don't always come up. If you're up against a direct template weapon, or if you're up against hacking, or if you run into surprise AROs, it could fall apart. Whereas the Bulleteer is a bit more resistant to that. You can come around and actually take some shootouts. You can shoot against TR bots. You can survive against hidden deployment, missile launchers and Spitfires sniper rifles because of your ODD. You're a bit more resilient to that, whereas the Peacemaker is much more susceptible to that, and you're actually paying more points for him. I considered the heavy shotgun again, but I just couldn't justify it at the end of the day because the Bulleteer outshines this guy so much that you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot if you're spending points on this instead. You're paying the same price effectively for something that overall comes in a lot lower. The TR bot, every faction has one, Pano being no different. I feel like Pano, is there a reason why they can't have a Ballistical 12 one? I think if they're the shooting superiority faction, or at least supposed to be, I mean, the Q drone's got mimetism, so Combined Army have got a better version of this guy. I think one of the other factions has a climbing plus version. You can still take him. I think he's a bit more relevant in vanilla Pano. But yeah, I mean, we're playing a faction here which has access to some really good aero troops in the form of the Fusilier missile and link team, or the Swiss Guard missile launcher, even the Hexas sniper. So in terms of holding the fort down, you can do better than this guy. But in terms of attacking, if you're putting assisted fire on him and moving out and shooting, well, the Bulleteer just does that a million times better. So I don't actually like to take the TR bot in NCA very much. Don't really love him. And lastly, the Locust. This guy's new. He's only just come out, in terms of the model, that is. The rules have been out for a while. I really don't like him. I really don't like him. This is an infiltrating unit that does not have marker state. So we're talking about models like the Zerat here. We're talking about a guy that, again, if you're going first, and he's making maximal use out of his infiltration to deploy out there, cool, alright, so you're moving out and you're attacking, but if you're going second and you deploy that far out, well, your opponent just kills you with something else that deploys next to it, infiltrating, right? So that's not great. What do their profiles look like? Breaker rifle, D-charges. D-charge is cool. I mean, you can get sabotage off, but he's not going to use D-charges in close combat, is he? Because that gives you a debuff to your stat. Sabotage is just one classified, and there are other ways to get classifieds too. Ballistic Skill 12, Breaker Combo Rifle, ODD. Again, if you're going around shooting people, couldn't you just be using the Bulleteer? Yeah, this guy's can infiltrate, but the Bulleteer can get up to the middle of the table in like one order, and then it's attacking. And the thing about the Bulleteer, again, is it's Combi Rifle, it's got a Spitfire, not a Breaker Rifle, so the Spitfire already better, but then it gets assisted fire, so it's hitting more reliably, and is throwing an extra dice, and it's just as tough, by the way. So in comparison to this Breaker Rifle guy, you'd much rather have the Bulleteer. And in close combat, sadly, CC20 doesn't cut it. The only time you really want to voluntarily get into close combat is where you have martial arts, or you have Prathion, or you have ICOL, or something like that. So I don't think this profile is any good. The double action guy, I mean, for the same reasons, you're paying an extra point for the double action, but again, if you're only CC20, you're never going to fight against other things which are also good at CC. And if you're up against something which is not very good at CC, well, most of the time you're just going to be shooting it anyway. So I don't like that. The boarding shotgun guy, this is a bit more interesting because he's got drop bears. Again, we're comparing this model to stuff in the game like, I don't know, Foxtrots, or Chasseurs, or Guilangs. I mean, all of these models have anti-personnel mines, which in some ways are better because they can be deployed in camo state. And with drop bears, to actually get them to throw them, you sometimes miss your shot and lose your order and lose your ammunition. The boarding shotgun's okay. I mean, I guess if your opponent's moved out with things or deployed things nearby and you can get the boarding shotgun in position, he's okay. And the grenades, again, that's kind of cool for speculative fire. It's not super reliable, but it's alright. But still, you're paying 30 points. I just don't like the idea of spending so many points on a guy who's not guaranteed to get a lot of work done. But then you've got a 23-point Bulleteer, which is highly likely to get work done. You see what I'm saying? I just don't feel like he's a wonderful investment, is what I'm saying. I did try him once. I tried the marksmanship guy at one point. So the thing about the marksman rifle is that, yeah, cool, he's got a good range band, ballistic skill 22, get a position with infiltration. But that game I was like, well, damn, I mean, I could have used a Bulleteer. And as soon as he is finished shooting and he goes hide somewhere, he's not in marker state, so something just comes up to him and kills him, throws smoke on him, or jams him, or whatever. So they're super expensive, and what really hurts is that these guys are more expensive than stuff like the Guilang Fort Observer. They're way more expensive than the Chasseurs and the Foxtrots and so forth. Having camo and being marker state is better than ODD in this context. I mean, if you're a Bulleteer or if you're Achilles or whatever, I mean, in that sort of context, sometimes the ODD is better if you're moving around and getting involved in a lot of face-to-face roles, but usually marker state is a lot better than ODD. Yeah, it's just a shame. I feel like they should give this guy one more rule, or make them CC 23, because then you sort of, okay, you've got a +3 bonus to your roll, at least. The Assault Hacking guy is the guy they've got a model for, but he's actually the worst. The thing about this is that you might feel compelled to take him as an NCA player because he's the only thing in your faction which has Specialist and Infiltration. But no marker state. He becomes a sitting duck for killer hackers. He really does. And yeah, you can press some buttons, but it's not too hard to move out there with your Hexa hacker and do that anyway. And as a fighter, I mean, you're paying 38 points, and he's just not getting a lot of fighting done. BS12 breaker combi. Don't like him, man. I don't like him. The thing about HSN3 is that it gave everybody one of these little units, and JSA got like the Shikami, and then NCA's got the Locust, and a lot of these units really kind of sucked. Toha were the real winners there with the Sectorial. And this combined army with a Nexus. I mean, those were really, great models which helped the faction a whole bunch. But NCA getting the Locust, it doesn't add anything to the faction that you really need. I mean, the faction's fine without him, so it's just a shame that they couldn't get a model which made the faction a bit more diverse, made you think harder about what to include, what to not to include. I know that there are a few of you out there who like him, but you can solidly count old VaulSC as being a dude that does not like the Locust. Damn, guys, I think we got there. I think we've talked about every single NCA unit. So it's time to wrap the video up. I want to say that I've been a bit harsh for a lot of these profiles, and I've tried to give my reasons why. It's been a bit tiring doing this video, so I might not have got everything right. What I want to finish up with saying is that this is not the best faction in terms of like power for winning. I think these guys don't come close to the level that Imperial Service and Toha are on at the moment, and they're not the most fun faction to play and collect in my view, because they don't have enough originality or specialization. What I would do personally if I was King of the World and in charge is I would look at the things in the faction which are a bit weaker and bring them up, or I'd bring in new things which can be combined with other models, or at least bring in some new ideas. I want to talk to you about a few of my little thoughts on that. I've already mentioned like a Diapho special character which can link with the bolts and has something to add to them, maybe a jammer or maybe something special, a kind of grenade or a type of gun or a special rule you don't see elsewhere, which helps to add flavor, some uniqueness, some character to NCA. I think that would be cool. One other idea I had was actually to bring in a unit that had a combination of rules that nothing else in the game has. Imagine if, and you'll have to suspend your disbelief here guys, that imagine if Pan-Oceania get a model, which is like a special ops sort of model, that has TO camouflage, not anything new there, but also has MSV2 at the same time. A lot of people would just be losing their minds going, oh my god, it's so broken. But let's just talk about it. What if this imaginary unit had TO camo and MSV2, but started in your deployment zone, or maybe for deployment level 1 actually, but didn't have anything super powerful like a sniper rifle or an H&G. Let's just say it has at best a marksman rifle, or at best a breaker rifle, something which doesn't have a lot of like oomph in terms of killing things. Well, moving around the battlefield and shooting with just using TO camo, based on the statistics, imagine that this model, unless it was using both abilities at the same time, wasn't as effective as a Hexa. So let's say it costs around about as much as a Hexa does, but is 4-2 speed, or doesn't have the same ballistic skill as the Hexa, for example, or there's some problem with it that makes it less effective unless you're both using MSV2 to shoot at models which have mimetism or ODD or whatever, and is also making use of its TO camouflage. You might also say, well, this would be the only unit in the game that can come out of hidden deployment and shoot at a model that is idled in smoke or moved through smoke. But if it's kind of weak and only as a combi rifle, well, it's not going to be like a super game breaking even when in that situation. But I think if you did give a model those particular rules, it would make Pan-Oceania players feel a little bit more individualized, feel a bit more special, I should say, to have something which is cool, which only they can have. And when you think of NCA, and when you think of Pan-Oceania, you think of that faction that has that model, and that's the definition of it. In all war games and strategy games I've played where there are factions, by the time you get to a certain level in the game, you stop thinking of this is the shooting faction, this is the close combat faction, because that's not a really good way of defining a faction like JSA and Pan-Oceania. you start to think of the factions in terms of the mechanics that they have access to, or the combinations they have access to, and their capability. That's how you define them. So I think of JSA as that faction that has Yojimbo, and that faction that can have Shinobu as a lieutenant, or that faction that can have the missile launcher link team heavy infantry, right? That's how I think of them and characterize them in my head. I don't think of NCA as the shooting faction. I think of NCA as that faction that can have the really cost-effective link team and heaps of cheerleaders and one or two very high-quality, good shooting troops in the form of the Swiss Guard or maybe the Ulan or something like that. So that's how I think of them. But I want to think of them as being a bit more diverse than that. I want to think of them as having some more unique abilities. Maybe a mercenary that can work for them, or yeah, like I said, a special character that can join a link team. But I think more link teams. You look at other factions like the US Ariadna or ISS, I mentioned that before. They have all these little flavorful, Harry's teams and core fire teams with special members of them, like Janissaries and not Hunzakuts, the Hafsas. NCA need more of that. They can only form the ORCs, the Fusilier link team, and the bolts, and that is it. It'd be much more interesting if they had a character that could form some more, or an inter-unit link team like the Knights get, where you can have 2 Magisters and 3 whatevers, right? Or I think it's 2 Santiagos and 3 Magisters or something like that. So I think NCA need a bit more of that. But anyway, it was a fun experience in this last month playing my 11 games with them. I enjoyed them, but I was really looking forward to coming back to playing my other factions because I find that stylistically the other ways of playing Infinity are more interesting. So yeah, NCA needs some work. They're a very capable force on the battlefield, and hopefully you guys have learned something. I think it's been a long time. But yeah, we'll see you on the next one. I'll be having some more battle reps with some other factions pretty soon.